Alright, in this video we're going to be using square roots to solve quadratic equations algebraically. Alright, so the first step that we have to do in order to solve for x whenever there's an x squared is we have to isolate the variable that's being squared. Alright, so the very first thing we have to do here is add 125 to both sides. We're going to be using our inverse operations. We end up canceling this out and we get 4x squared equals 100. Once again, we have to continue to isolate the x squared, so we're going to divide by 4. So x squared is equal to 25. Alright, at this point, our x, the variable that's being squared, is now isolated. And at this point, we want to go ahead and do the way that we would cancel out something that's being squared is we're going to take the square root of it. Okay, so we're going to take the square root. And when we do that, we have to do it to both sides. Now, the square root of x squared, we're trying to say what value times itself gets us x squared. So in this case, x times x would equal x squared. So the answer to that is just x. Now, the question right here is, what is the square root of 25? So we know that 5 times 5 ends up getting us 25. But we also have negative 5 times negative 5. Gets us 25. Okay, so we have to account for both the positive and negative variations. So what we do is right from the get-go, right from the beginning, when we add that square root, we're going to add a plus or minus to the front of it. Now we can go ahead and solve it. So plus or minus gets carried down, and the square root of 25, like we said, is 5. Alright, so the answer to this problem is positive and negative 5. And the way when we have a plus or minus sign, that really means that there's two answers. Okay. Let's go ahead and do our next one. Right here, again, we have to isolate by subtracting 9 from both sides. We end up with 2x squared equals 0. Let's continue to isolate. We can divide by 2. The 0 divided by anything is just going to be 0. Alright, and now we want to go ahead and take the square root so we can cancel out our squared and get the x alone. Take the square root of 0. Alright. We'll add that plus and minus in there again. Alright, so let's go ahead and see what x equals to now. So if we take the square root of 0, we're asking ourselves what number times itself equals 0, and that's obviously 0. But because there cannot be a negative 0, we're not going to use the plus or minus, we're just going to leave it as x equals 0. Here we would end up having one solution. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at two more. Alright, this one over here, we're going to go ahead and subtract 30 from both sides. We end up with x squared is equal to negative 20. Once again, we have to do this, take the square root of both sides, and we end up getting x is equal to. Now, is there any number that can multiply by itself to get us a negative 20? And in fact, no number can multiply by itself to get a negative number. So if we're ever taking the square root of a negative number, we're actually going to stop and we're going to write no solution. Anytime you're taking the square root of a negative number, we're going to be writing no solution. Alright, no real numbers can multiply by themselves to get a negative. Alright, let's take a look at our final problem. Once again, we have to isolate this x squared, so we're going to divide by 25. On both sides. X squared is equal to, now this 36 over 25, you have to ask yourself, can you simplify it? And in fact, we cannot simplify this problem. Alright, so we are going to just write it out. And we're going to take the square root in order to get x, just one solo x by itself. Now again, we have to add in our plus or minus. Alright, because we have both the positive and negative answer that we can get. And let's take a look. We can rewrite this using the quotient property, and we can write it as square root of 36 over the square root of 25. And we do know that the square root of 36 is 6, so let's bring our plus and minus down, is 6, and the square root of 25 is 5. So our answer right here is a positive and a negative 6/5. Alright, and those are our answers here. There's one final problem I want to show you how to do. Alright, that problem would be x squared minus 8 is equal to 0. Okay, so here's our final problem that I want to show you how to do. Again, we have to isolate by adding 8 to both sides. We end up with x squared is equal to 8. We have to get 1x, alright, so we want to cancel out the squared, so we're going to square root both sides, taking a positive and negative answer. So we end up with x is equal to plus or minus root 8. The question you have to ask yourself at this point is, can we simplify this root 8 any further? And I'm going to go ahead and take this up here. So the square root of 8, we can go ahead and split that up. Again, we're looking to in order to simplify it, because we want it in simplified radical form, we want to split it up into factors, one of which is a square root. So I'm going to split it into square root of 4, or that one of which is a perfect square. Split it into a 4 and a 2. Square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And we know that the square root of 4 is 2, and the square root of 2 can't be simplified any further. So our answer here is a positive and a negative 2 root 2. Alright? And this is our final answer.